Hi, I'm Eddie.
Hi, I'm Breach.
Hi, I'm Anita, and together we're your mental well-being trio.
And please do remember to hit the subscribe button below and add any comments you might have. We'd love to hear from you.
When I worked in the bank, we would make these video productions. It's a 20-minute video production, and the crew would come in, and bear in mind that they would use professional actors but they would not be acting, it is presenting. So they would use professional actors as presenters. 3 days for a 20-minute video.
Yeah.
3 days.
We did well there.
But then it obviously, when you have all of those things, and it's smooth and it's slick and it's one of the things that I really have to remind myself, we don't have that type of equipment, time, or the need for that. No, we wanted to try and in fact, a lot of that was, although it was well done, it was something that was expected. Nowadays, that is not expected anymore.
Oh, okay.
But this contagion effect is also, I experienced it this week that went past. Because my wife was exhibiting at a very, very large agricultural show. But it's the first time that they've had this now because of the COVID thing. It's the first time they've had it in 2 years. And it's amazing. I mean, for a start, there's the value of the equipment that's standing around. It's fascinating. And but that the positive energy constantly, it was, and you can see how it rubs off on people. To the effect that people actually mentioned, isn't this a wonderful vibe that's around us?
Oh, okay.
And we have to be so careful about the negatives, because we're really going through a bad patch at the moment with electricity. The country's lost more than 50% of its generating capacity at the moment.
Wow.
So everybody goes through these things. It's like 4 hours at a time, and you go through two sessions of 4 hours, and then there's another. It's actually 5 hours, but they don't always do it. So it's more something like 2 hours and 10 minutes every time, or 4 hours and 10 minutes, and then another 2 hours. Some of that happens when you're asleep, which is fine. But it's amazing when you talk to people how negative it is. Immediately becomes how that just gets people. And the one thing that I try to talk, I spoke to my parents over the weekend as well, and to somebody, and it was actually somebody else that I spoke to, and it was last thing I said, "Oh, just think how quiet everything is. It's amazing how things go quiet when there's no electricity around. So let's look at it from that. And you couldn't just sit in front of the television and just watch video after video, whatever. You could actually be together with people. It's really.
Well, we over the last, well, I suppose it didn't happen so much, but anytime that we've had an electricity cut due to just a power outage or a storm or something like that, that's one of the things that I always loved about it is we get out the candles.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful soft light.
Yeah.
And everyone looks better in candlelight, softer. Even their expressions. Even if somebody was cross, it doesn't look so harsh under candlelight. It's really interesting.
And speaking of that, because on Friday, one of our neighbors, it was her birthday, and there was going to be this power outage. So I have a little generator and I asked her, would you like me to go and get the generator? The house is full of people. And she said, no, it's fine. She just has candles all over the show. And exactly what you were saying. And it was this very quiet type of, it just calmed almost everything. But they were also doing what we call in South Africa a braai. You would call it a barbecue, I think, right, of chicken. So this was the other thing, it was in the house, and so obviously some of the smoke came through, and so you have this candlelight and you have this smoky type of No, you didn't even realize it's there until you take a photograph and it looks like all the photographs were dated back to 1950 because the people were taking photographs of each other. And it was absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely, use electrical light kind of almost too much, and people get used to that, you
Yeah.
know. For sure. For sure.
Yeah, and
Yeah. Like,
I last night I decided that, well, yesterday, even in the evening, I was going to get the generator on because I wanted to have access to electricity for that. Bear in mind that I've already gone through almost 4.5 hours previously, so I wanted it, and you become conscious of the fact that you are now making a racket, you're making a noise, and it is at night,
Oh,
so
okay.
so it's almost like you feel guilty because you're running. It's that judge scenario, if you may. Um, but it's a racket. There's no, it really isn't. So you have electricity, but it's a loud, although I've
oh
got
yeah,
in the house,
generator noise.
but you have that, all
Yeah.
the time. Because we live right next to like a hill or a mountain, if you may, you also have that echo effect. And I decided that it was enough. Now I'm going to switch it off because the neighbor's gone. It's just going to be distracting.
Mm.
Just imagine they all sitting in the darkness and they hear this.
Yeah, because it's not like they have the TV on to drown it out or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also
And
the other thing about it is that it is so there's a lot of noise pollution on that, but there's also there's other pollution in your mind because you start thinking about how you're inconveniencing people. So
mhm,
there's literally a thing like that.
And then,
watch
of
it.
course, like I do notice it still, even like there is some, depending on the moon phases and that, it's much darker at certain phases than it is at other phases. Because even if it's a cloudy sky and you can't see the moon, you're still getting the light. But
Yeah.
then there are certain phases like when it's totally dark, but it's very seldom, what you'd call
Yeah.
black dark, like.
Yeah, well, you see
Yeah. Where you can't see your hand in front of your face
Yeah,
there.
yeah. But very
yeah,
seldom you experience that nowadays
Very
because
seldom.
of light pollution. But I do remember that from my childhood days where you couldn't see anything. Yeah.
well, there's also the thing that's when it gets dark like this with us, where you have total electricity failure. Now, there's always people that do have lights. Now, we, for instance, do have electrical lights. It's a globe that has a little battery in it. Okay,
Okay.
so it lasts for about 2 hours, if you may. But the big thing is that it becomes darker, much darker, and it's amazing how the sky suddenly lights up again because you don't have that light pollution. But all of these, to bring it to the mental well-being side.
Yes.
Anita, you mentioned something about, you just mentioned, and my thought went there, is that it's stored in batteries. And it's really what we also have to try and do, is to store our energy for,
Mm.
it's the more you work around positiveness, the more energy you have to deal with when it's dark, you
True.
know, and that
Yeah.
different,
Well, that's it. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then that,
Yeah. And go ahead. Go ahead.
and that different darkness levels that you were talking about,
Mm.
that's where you could literally draw from positive energy within. That's where the light sort of becomes. It helps to navigate you through the darker times in your life.
Yeah. And you know what I'd like to say within that is I love how that's spoken about within HeartMath. We speak about it from within depletion to renewal, and taking that time to charge your inner battery. And this is done then at times where you do your small, micro meditations, and you're topping up that inner battery with that. But also, moving, there's a whole spectrum to move from depletion to renewal. and across the emotional landscape, you know, the spectrum of emotions, you know, I don't like to refer to anything as positive or negative, because within the different, you know, depths of those emotions, there's actually, all emotions are energy, right? So it's possible to tap into the energy of any of the emotions and um, develop that as as a renewal, you know, as a charge, a possible charging source. And what I've been thinking about a lot lately around that is the fact that, you know, um, when we look at anything, you know, and people talk about and think about stress, that it's actually their belief about it that really causes the depletion for them, and that it's not the actual event or situation that causes them to be depleted, but how they choose to respond to the situation. And that's really important, because within our PQ work as well, you know, we realize that the work that we do to recognize how we are seeing the world and the lens through which we're viewing it, you know, what creates our perception of what we call a reality around it, is not the same for any other individual in that space. So we always have that, you know, power within us to change how we look at everything around us. And as Wayne Dyer says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so even within that, you know, if somebody looks out and says, "Oh, it's dark," you know, and you go, "Well, actually, it's kind of a different level of darkness." And then we kind of start to notice, oh, there are different levels of darkness, you know, and it's like in you know, in Ireland with the rain, nobody looks out and goes, "It's raining." You go, "Oh, you know, it's torrential rain, or it's soft rain, or it's," you know, there's like 100 different ways of speaking about the type of rain, you know. And it reminds me then, I know I'm talking a bit about the spectrum of emotions, and the fact that within the studies, it was something that came up with Brené Brown, and when they did the studies to research to find out what do people understand about emotion, they found that people only have, what is it? Isn't it 4 emotions, like mad, sad, bad, or glad, something like that, and that they don't have the vocabulary to speak about their emotions, you know. And when they start to understand and become more, let's say, literate in how to speak about the different types of emotions, in that there's so many different types of even sadness, you know, and that when they become more granular about understanding, you know, well, what's going on, then you start to understand where it's coming from and what's it about. But where, you know, so where I'm going with that is it changes everything then, and that then changes how you feel. So it's just interesting that when we use those sage powers that we've spoken about before, and we get curious about what's going on, yeah, it just, we take a step back and we notice, and it changes immediately a cascade of feelings, and something that could have been depleting then becomes renewing, and that battery becomes a little bit more charged rather than, you know, lower. Anyway, that was a long
Fascinating. It is fascinating.
It is. It's also in the meaning-centered world. A lot of people talk about it's your attitude to life. Really, it's the attitudinal values. And I quite like the term from a value perspective, because it is what you decide what you're going to do with this. Really is that you're going to decide. And if there's a darkness means that it can be followed by light. It's always going to be like that.
Yeah, and the other thing is that shared humanity, that we all have darkness, and darkness is part of everything. And in fact, you know, darkness can be quite wonderful too. You know, there's like a place for darkness. And if we begin to understand that a little bit more and welcome all parts of life, you know, as opposed to only wanting a certain aspect, which narrows our experience, there's so much, you know, in people's, say, memoirs or autobiographies about different things that they have been through in their life. And pretty much all of them would say that they wouldn't change any of those experiences, you know, um, because of how they have grown or how they have developed, you know, their capacity to have meaning within their lives. So it is really interesting that once we allow ourselves to accept what's happening, it changes. You know, it just changes how we feel about it, doesn't it? Rather than, as you said, Eddie, when the electricity outages are coming and, you know, they're getting worse and people are just focusing on, you know, that side of it that makes it harder for them, or how they're seeing it's making life harder for them. And so then they're going into that spiral, you know, of kind of lower feeling and depleting themselves. And then it just gets, you know, worse. Whereas, like you said, you're looking at all those nice aspects of it, you know, and focusing on those, and you feel completely different then.
Yeah, well, there's the thing about this, from because it's all contagious. It remains a contagious thing. So we all know specifically in South Africa what went wrong, why we have this specific problem, and it's because of corruption, that the systems weren't replaced or repaired, and now there's no money to do it, and it's a big thing to try and fix these type of things up. But it's amazing because you then get into the conversations and people start talking about this, and somebody that I know one day just made a comment. It said, if people walk into their houses and start complaining about everything that's wrong with the current government, his response would be very politely, not as crude as, but it really comes down to, well, tell me something that's new, because we keep on repeating that. So why do we spend our energy on repeating exactly what we know is wrong, instead of focusing on something else? So and it's amazing how your positive memories can come back to you as well when you start allowing it, that exploration thing or innovative type of thing, whatever it is that you want to. In fact, there might even be empathy in what I'm going to say now. Is that a thought came up to me on months and months ago when we also had a problem like this at that specific time, and two of our neighbors, we saw one another, and it was dark, and we said, would you like to have a cup of coffee? And they came in, and it was a totally there was no invitations, if you may. There was nothing. Everybody just came in, and we sat here for 2 hours just chatting in the sort of dimness of the day, of the evening. You know, there was a candle, and it was, you know, those type of things. And you know, there's good memories to be found in those levels of darkness. Really. So even if we, you know, I do want to say last things that you look at. I'm always fascinated by when there's a funeral, how people laugh at a funeral. You know, because it's all part of, you need to have those we need those things in life as well, because that's where you would say your farewells. But farewells is not just about crying; it's actually chuckling and talking about the positiveness of that person. That
celebrating life.
Yes, yes. And isn't it also amazing? It's that point in time where we stop talking about all the negative things that you might have thought about the person. We only talk about the good stuff.
Do you find with the electricity, you know, the electricity is going to be gone, that you're more organized then, because you know that if you want to get something done, it has to be done by 5 o'clock or whatever?
Exactly.
More focused is probably the word I'm looking for.
You're definitely far more focused, because you know what it is that we take life for granted when things just is there. So it's a brilliant observation there. I didn't even think about that, but it's true. We do plan you start planning your time better when there's because we are dependent on electricity. I mean, and it's one of the things that's there. And why not have it? You know, there's nothing wrong with electricity, but it is. There's definitely a planning thing, and that organization actually releases stress. Then I think about that.
Absolutely. The more choice you have, the more,
Yes, that
you
is.
know, tension it can add, because you're just thinking, oh, you know, all the things that you could do, but then you're focused on, actually, I need to structure this because I can only do this during the windows of electrical opportunity. And then you know that you have to make that plan over those few days as well, because again, you're only going to get certain blocks. So yeah, it will release you then, because you know during the time it's off, well then, you know, you can only do these certain other things. Absolutely. It's releasing you from, you know, the constant thinking about what you could else do. What other things you could do.
And it also, another thing is that adversity, if I can call it adversity, because it's not really adversity, but in that, is that sometimes that also creates a feeling of taking other people into consideration. So one of the things that we have been asked, which I never thought about, but it just came through now in the media, is to people to use water more sparingly, and don't just don't let water just run away, and things like that. And the reason for that is that the municipalities are struggling to, they don't have enough time to pump water into the reservoirs. And suddenly it becomes a collectiveness of considering other people. Although it's a small, tiny little thing as to, am I now going to, wash out a whole, wash a cup properly, if you may, or just leave it, and until you have sufficient cups to wash them out, because you're wasting and water. It's quite fascinating how you start thinking about other people and considering other people.
And that's really lovely, because I was just thinking about the fact that, you know, there's I think it is international, isn't it, Breach? A week of peace, or focus on peace.
It is international,
Yeah, this week. And there are a number of different things happening to bring people together in community. One that we would be part of, you know, is the global peace meditation. Breeze, you know, that on
Wednesday, isn't it? Lunchtime Wednesday.
Yeah. And, you know, it's just when you're talking about, you know, that it's just that work of considering that we're all part of this one humanity.
Yes.
You know, and when you focus on others, your mental well-being improves.
Yes.
That's documented very strongly in the research. It's when we feel isolated or separated, or when we are separating ourselves from others, that we start to feel less well mentally. So that's an important piece of that, which that whole electrical lack is actually giving you. Isn't that wonderful? Bringing people together. Those people wouldn't have been in that house together without that, you know. So it is growing that sense of community, which is powerful in and of itself, isn't it?
I would like to, if some of the audience or listeners or people that watch, just share in the comments as well, and don't ask the question perhaps, but rather give ideas on how you can share from a community perspective to make it more of and how that affects, how that could affect your own or the other person's well-being.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. And maybe, could you you've given an example. Would you have an example from your perspective on that question?
I have a perspective on that question. And of course, anything that we do with community, just, I suppose, by just even taking the other person's needs into consideration helps them and helps you, no matter what it is. It can be something simple, like knocking on
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. I don't know why this has come into my mind, but I know that you love to grow your own vegetables.
Yeah, I do.
And it because during the summer there, when I was doing the summer camps with the kids, one of the moms came in to collect her kid and brought us. She had a surplus of vegetables, of course, like courgettes
Yeah,
and some salad leaves, and she brought some for everybody. And I was just thinking, and it was such a lovely experience,
yeah.
to receive that. But it's such a lovely thing that, I think happens often in gardens where somebody, plants and ends up with maybe a little bit too much of something. But then I know from other gardeners, what they've often done is like, well, one might have an extra lot of something and somebody else will have an extra lot of something else. And so then they'll share, and
I
bring it
know, and
together.
actually, I'm glad you said that because I'm spending the last both myself and Martin kind of wondering who will we give this to, who will we give that to, because we've got a really glut of tomatoes at the moment. And I am going to,
Oh,
and we were giving away apples. And actually, we sent a lot of apples, a big basket of apples up to my brother's house. And actually, my sister-in-law sent me pictures then during the week of where my nephew had made loads of apple crumbles with it. So I was going, oh, it was great to see it used. But the community part of it is, it actually strengthened our relationship in that, she sent me photographs and I knew what was going on because I don't really see them very often. It was like, but anyway, yes, that is true.
But you see part of it, and we don't just have to think about when you give or you help or whatever that is, you can see the appreciation, or sometimes you can't even see the appreciation. We
That's
shouldn't
true.
be doing it, and we shouldn't be doing it for the appreciation, but
Oh
really,
no, yeah.
but the effect of it, Bridge, and that's what you're talking about. The effect of it is suddenly there's a communication that wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
If you had not
yeah,
done that, you would not have received something, and just to see it,
Yeah.
that,
yeah. It's
and
really beautiful.
yeah, it's wonderful. Mm. And so we can actually find a lot of things. There's a lady that went on retirement. Well, she's on in retirement for a number of years already. And there's this vacant piece of area. It's a municipal area. And she went out and she started a garden there, just for this little patch of land. And she just started making a garden. It's not a vegetable, it's a flower garden. And it's not a flower garden, it's a plant garden, which is everything in there is um, water wise, if you may. So it's a lot of it is indigenous that we would really cope with exactly there. And you go past there and you notice it without knowing that somebody did this out of her own. It wasn't something that government did.
Mm.
It wasn't the municipality. This was an individual that decided that she's going to plant that, and it's this little place of beauty, just this beautiful place that she's created
Yeah.
for other people.
For everyone else to enjoy. Huh?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm. And that is a lovely feeling, isn't it? When you realize that somebody has done something out
Yeah.
of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah.
And then she benefits from that because every time she sees it and she realizes,
Yeah.
that she had this idea and she did it. And it's
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And of course, going back to the mental well-being, I mean, working in a garden and planting and sowing and working with the soil is about one of the best things you can do for your mental well-being. Yeah.
Well, yeah, one of the things there is that creativeness whilst you're busy doing it, because your mind, you're so focused. I believe that a lot of gardening actually activates this right hand side of the brain, if you may, all the sage powers. Because basically, what you're doing is that you're starting to experience the soil and the smell, and you're watching and you're doing certain things. And that doesn't mean that your left hand brain isn't working together at that point in time. But what it definitely does is you stop thinking about all the other things that's happening. You're just busy with it. You're so focused on that you almost go into a form of, without you knowing it, you're meditating, and you are relaxing the entire system to do that. Of course, if you do this the following day and you work in the garden, the following day you are reminded because your legs are sore, your knees are
That is true. Oh my
but,
God.
But
but,
it
but
is,
yeah, but even in that, it's actually there's that, oh, today I'm sore because I did this. Well, it's something that you did, and there's that actually that reminds you about the positiveness that you've had.
And you built a muscle.
Yes.
yeah, and you've exercised your mental well-being muscles as well
Yeah,
to
exactly.
increase their strength, because it's such a multi-sensory experience that you're describing, and you're present with all of your senses. So that's always a renewing experience.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And on that note, we would love to hear anybody's, comments or thoughts around this diverse conversation that we've had. So please do add your comments and speak to how your community and your thoughts around how you can impact that community in any way, or how experiences that you've had recently.
Thank you.